People for relatively little money can build automation that allows them to be fast and efficient in ways that can compete with the bigger players that have bigger budgets. If you're a small business, and whether or not you're selling widgets or anything, think about consumables. Think about ongoing costs that people, how can you offer them value in exchange for commitment?
Today we are exploring how to turn business goals into actionable results. In 2026, small businesses don't need the biggest budgets to win. They need the smartest workflows and a strategy that moves them away from hero to zero revenue cycle.
My theory, and I tell this to anyone, any kind of workflow that relies on human intervention will fail.
Hello everyone, this is Kripa Anand and welcome to the CanadianSME Small Business Podcast. Today we are exploring how to turn business goals into actionable results. In 2026, small businesses don't need the biggest budgets to win. They need the smartest workflows and a strategy that moves them away from hero to zero revenue cycle. Joining us today is Ken Quigley, the president and founder of Keystroke.ca. With over 3 decades of experience, Ken has led his team to become the #1 ACT CRM reseller in the world. As a top developer with over 100 products in the market, Ken is an expert in CRM, marketing, and project management solutions that empower businesses to scale and flourish. So before further ado, let's welcome this very special guest. Ken, welcome to the podcast. Such a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you. That's a great introduction.
Now, Ken, you believe that smart, minimal technology investments are key for small businesses to compete with the larger players out there in the market, right? So let's start the conversation by understanding from your perspective, how can small businesses use CRM and automation to scale effectively?
That's an interesting question because that has evolved over the years. I mean, you've referenced how long I've been in business, so I realize I'm a fair bit older than you. But when I started, there was really no internet. In fact, there wasn't even a Windows 95, which makes me feel older than I intended, yes.
It's so hard to imagine a world without that, right?
And true. And to make matters worse, there was no Microsoft Office. So there was no real internet. There was no Microsoft Office. So back then, the options were pretty limited. Like you would install something on your computer. Centralization was kind of a joke because there was no way of tying everyone together. That's changed. That's changed significantly. So now, fast forward 30 years, internet isn't a luxury. It's a utility. Everyone has it. Microsoft Office is ubiquitous, not just on every computer, but pretty much on every single device. And the ways in which we consume data have changed quite a bit. We talk about, when we develop websites and things like that, we spend as much time aiming for mobile as we do desktop because 50% of the content tends to be consumed with mobile. So that really changes how people work. When you are looking at CRM technology and how it's changed, one, it's centralized, which was something that was completely anachronistic back in the early 90s. There was no centralization. And you would install it on your computer and then you would work on it by yourself behind a firewall maybe. Now everyone consumes it on their mobile device and on their tablets. And that's changed is it has allowed teams of 1, 2, 3, or 4 to operate much more efficiently, much quicker. They're able to have all their data centralized. They can grab it in an instant on their phones, their mobile devices, their computers, wherever they are, on-site, off-site. And that has allowed them to operate much more efficiently, able to build workflows, because workflows wasn't even a thing. No one even knew what you were talking about 15, 20 years ago when you mentioned workflows. But now people for relatively little money can build automation that allows them to be fast and efficient in ways that can compete with the bigger players that have bigger budgets. So that has really leveled the playing field in ways that I think 20, 30 years ago, we couldn't even envision.
Yeah.
So, I look at small businesses with like a $30 a month budget, being able to build workflows that automatically communicate with their customers when renewals come up, automatically engage them, when they click on their website, automatically add their information into databases that sends out a welcoming campaign. This is stuff that used to be inaccessible to, small businesses of 1 to 5 people, but now it's available to a single proprietor who can now keep up with the big players that obviously have more human resources, more marketing resources, more selling resources. The average person could sit for $30 a month and run a marketing campaign that is, response-driven, nurture marketing. They can send out quotes in seconds.
Right.
Okay. Know when people are reading, know when to follow up. This, as I said, has really leveled the playing field. And, $1 a day when you're talking about competing with the cost of a coffee, this makes it pretty much accessible to anyone.
Definitely. I loved how you articulated it so simply. And, from a layman's perspective, it was pretty helpful. I think what you said about using targeted tech to, mirror the capabilities of a giant corporation is exactly how a small team can dominate their niche in 2026. So thank you for those insights. Now, Ken, let's explore how to build consistent monthly revenue. So, when we talk about cash flow, as you mentioned, businesses often, have that barrier in their ecosystem. So how do you suggest, how can businesses create consistent recurring revenue and not just, do good 1 month and then sit with nothing for the rest of 3 months? So,
well, before I start sounding smarter than I am, I will tell you that this lesson kind of came to me slowly as well through the first part of my career. And it wasn't until maybe the early 2000s when I started, when we were selling ACT and we realized that it was a capital expense. People would buy it and then they would own it. And that was both good and bad because there wasn't any kind of ongoing revenue with that. So we started looking for opportunities that we can have recurring income. And that is kind of where it's a mindset thing where people have to look for it. For us, what we did is we looked for it around maintenance and support. And what that meant is, if you subscribed to kind of at a lower level, we would provide you tech support and you would get the next version free of charge. So that was something that's often called M&S, maintenance and support. So that made sense in our business. But, in a subscription world like ours, it seems like kind of an easy thing to suggest and maybe isn't as relatable to other small businesses. But I'll give you a couple of examples. A number of years ago, my daughter and I, we drove out to a hot tub place because we wanted to buy a hot tub for the family. And so I brought her out. She was all excited about that. And I was talking to the business owner. And, we were talking standard war stories between others about our respective businesses. And he looked at me and he says, I would love to have recurring revenue. I'd love to have it. But we deal with big one-time sales. Someone gives us 10, 20, 30,000. And, we really don't have the opportunity for much recurring revenue after that. And I said, really? Okay. Well, I'm about to buy this. I imagine that over the course of the next year and year after that and year after that, there's going to be certain consumables that I will have to consume. I'll have to buy all the time, filters, chemicals, things like that. And he said, yeah. Well, how often do I need to buy filters? Just as an example. And he said, twice a year. And I said, okay. And they're in 4-packs and that. And I said, well, what if I suggested that you make a subscription out of these where people can save a little bit of money by committing to buying. And that way you avoid the people, possibly like myself, that may stretch out. Well, I was like, let me get a few more months out of that. What if I, committed to buying every 6 months or every 8 months, and I got a little savings and you had more guaranteed income? You offered a bit of savings, but you don't have to worry about suffering people trying to stretch out their purchases. And he loved it. And I said, okay, how does that work with chemicals? What about, the bromine and the shocks and that? And he said, well, people, buy them like 4 times a year. Well, what if you charged, for 3 and delivered 4? Okay. Now, I don't want to pat myself on the back, but he loved the idea. And within 1 month, they had implemented it across their company. And I was, of course, one of the first customers. I signed up for it, and they loved it. And we talked a couple of years later. It was a really successful program. And that was an example of him just kind of looking for an opportunity for things that he sells. Because even though the big sale was like the $20,000, $30,000 hot tub, there was all kinds of ongoing things. And I've talked to my brother who owns a body shop, like whether or not he can offer, oil changes, like 2 oil changes for the cost of 1, and build that up. Now, what isn't understood by people is that as you build up subscriptions, you build up a membership base. And that membership base can be appealed to on many levels. One, you get, you're able to upsell them on different things that may not be related. New products come in, new accessories, new this, new that. Hey, to our special members, so you can start selling membership perks and upsells. And the other thing that these COD businesses, like these one-off sale businesses, where they go, as you described, from hero to zero each and every single month, is that they not only do they increase their ongoing recurring revenue, but they increase the value of their business. Okay, and that's something that people don't necessarily think when they're in the kind of survival mode. Well, what's the value of my business? I've got a really, not so inspiring story where my barber, I went to him for like 15 years. And towards the end of his career, he got to know me and we would talk business from time to time. And he said, Ken, what would you change about my business? And I said, the first thing I would eliminate is the fact that I have to pay you every single time I come in. And he said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, that makes me stretch it out. So a 2-month break may become a 3-month break, and I'll, trim. And that's what you're battling, is that your revenue is all COD. What if you went to your customers, each one came in, is I'm going to charge you $120 a year, okay? And you can come in every single month for a haircut. Now, they're not gonna, okay? They're like, no one's going to come in every single month, but they can. So they'll immediately start selling themselves on the value. But what that's doing is that's establishing each and every single month guaranteed revenue. Fast forward to the end of his career, and he was coming to me and he was saying, I've got to retire. And he was at retirement age. And I'm trying to sell my business. This was a business that he had worked for 45 years in the same model, COD, no predictable revenue at all. And he was asking $10,000 for it, which is a sad story, surpassed only by the fact he couldn't get it. And he eventually had to give up with the business because on paper, the business was worthless. And that was hard for him to kind of accept because he had done the same model. Now, you may think, okay, but how many people are barbers out there? Well, apply the same thing to a real estate agent. A real estate agent that is, running through, deal after deal.
Yeah.
Well, if you've got a database of people that you're nurturing with newsletters and you've got regular recurring revenue, maybe not predictable, but at least recurring, repeat business over and over again, that becomes a value. So when you get to the end of your career, you actually have a book of business that's worth something. If you haven't kept track of that, you're going to someone, buy my book of business, and it's like, tell me why I would. Okay, like why is this group of 500 people on your spreadsheet worth anything to me? And that's what I try to tell people is if you centralize your information, you organize it in a way that it does things for you, your business will actually be worth more. You won't just make more money, but you'll have a business that is worth more. And it's more generalizable than people think. But it all starts with a mindset of looking for the opportunities. In my brother's case, oil changes, whatever. And I don't want to sound smarter than I am. There's examples I can't think of. But if the takeaway from this conversation is if you're a small business and whether or not you're selling widgets or anything, think about consumables. Think about ongoing costs that people, how can you offer them value in exchange for commitment?
Right.
And if you do that and it's convincing, then you can start building your business in a sustainable way.
Wow, I think this was the shortest masterclass on CRM.
Oh,
And you keep saying that, you may sound smarter than you are, but you are very smart and very passionate about what you do.
oh, of
And
course.
I'm able to see that in your eyes, right? To the entrepreneurs watching, in 2026, your business is only as strong as your last interaction. If your customer journey feels disjointed, you are leaving money on the table. Ken and the Keystroke team didn't become the number one act reseller by accident. They did it by making every goal actionable. Their recent sale of 6 years worth of applications to Act shows that when you build tools that solve real problems, the market notices. Don't let your data sit idle. Visit Keystroke.ca and learn how to turn your CRM from a simple list into a high-powered revenue engine. All right, it's time for a quick break right here, but don't go anywhere. Stay with us because next up, we are getting into how to turn your goals into real daily action. Stay tuned.
Hey, you think you know UPS? Yeah, that's us. Everybody knows that. You know what you didn't know? This. Okay, try to keep up. Ocean, us. Ground, rail, air, so us. Guess who? Us. Customs cleared, borders cleared, done. Us. You still with me? Wait for it. Boom. Us. Intelligent, automated, fulfillment. Us. Yep. Healthcare too. Digital your thing? Yeah. Well, book it, ship it, track it. You feeling me yet? Yep. That's all us. That's all UPS.
Welcome back, listeners. Let's dive straight in and break down how you can make your business goals actually drive results every single day. Now, after this masterclass, I'd love for you to tell our audience a little bit about your personal journey as well. So, this passion, has it been there since the beginning of your life? Were you interested in business as a child? Did you stumble upon it in your career, or how did you get to what you're doing today?
There's a bit of DNA involved. My entire family is are entrepreneurs, whether they were, neon sign salesman, real estate. As I said, my brother owns a body shop. So it certainly, there's a common thread in the family. For me, I did the standard journey in university, came out, and it's like, great, I got a, arts degree, which qualifies me to do absolutely nothing. But in the early 90s, I had a strong interest in technology, which at the time set me apart, and not so much in skill as interest, and anything you're interested in, you eventually get good at. So I would apply myself, and I got, you talked about how you can pick up on the enthusiasm that I have. That's something I've always had. I've always been able to get people excited about their business and opportunities. So I began to discover that I can sell people on technology. Now, I have to say, initially, I probably backed the wrong horse because I was more committed to hardware than I think the future would reward. So, as we approached the we went through the end of the century, and of course Y2K, that treated me well. And I got into the first few years of the 2000s, it really started to reverse. So I remember sitting around the kitchen table with my wife and saying, my cheese is moving here. Like I'm having a real who moved my cheese moment, and I'm going to have to either pivot or I'm just going to be roadkill. And I looked around. Because I had been in business at that point for 10 years, I'd become good with QuickBooks and accounting. I'd been good with CRM using Act. Neither of them seemed kind of like operational. They didn't seem necessarily like a trade. But I thought, Act made a little bit more sense for me because I had already spent 10 years selling technology. Why don't I sell that same group CRM? Because I thought, hardware had become like a paper plate. People didn't want to fix it. They just used it and then disposed of it. So it wasn't anything that people were investing in fixing or maintaining.
Yeah.
Data's different. So I thought, if I get into data, people are more likely to invest more in maintaining it and being able to access it. So that made a little bit more sense to me business-wise. So I flew down to Georgia, Atlanta, Georgia, and I got certified in ACT. Okay, and I remember the instructor was saying, "I got to tell you, the last." One of the students from last year was also Canadian, and he won the Rising Star Award, which was the best new partner. And I thought, oh, okay, well, that sounds like a challenge. So I flew back, and obviously I started my ACT career. I won the Rising Star, and then I started to realize that doing business the way everyone was doing it, because I had the benefit of at least being in 10 years in business, doing the way everyone was doing, which was strictly organic sales, going out, getting customers, rinse and repeat. That was a very slow organic method for business growth. And I wasn't opposed to that, but doing it that way really would lead to very predictable slow growth. So I started looking at it more inorganically, and I said, well, what if I can actually go out and buy other businesses like what I'm trying to build? So I started looking at the field of competition, and they always had rankings of ACT consultants and that, like who was here and who was there, and I would pay attention very closely. And anytime someone would start dropping in ranking, I thought, maybe they're not so committed, and I would go buy them. And I would approach them, buy their business, and I kept doing this. And I do it like 15, 20 times, and I started buying up a lot of.
That's a very smart strategy.
Well, in combination, if you combine inorganic and organic, you can accelerate your growth very quickly. So in my first year, I was like 50th. And then, by the second or third year, I was in the top 10. So by the time 2014 rolled around, I was number one in the world and haven't given up that spot since. So it's worked out well. The funny story.
What a flex.
It is a bit of a flex. The funny thing is, though, the teacher that from that class now works for me, and the guy that had preceded me as the Canadian, I bought his business too.
Oh my God! So it's a full circle kind of.
Yeah, so it was
for you, right?
it was certainly something that I benefited from. Not because I couldn't compete technically. Our industry was peopled with what I call plumbers, just very, very strong technical skills, but they would just bounce from job to job, and they didn't really look kind of beyond the job in front of them to really understand how to build their business. That was something that I'd been doing for 10 years, so I had a bit more experience in that. So I applied the two together and, produced pretty good results.
Congratulations, firstly, for everything that you've achieved so far.
But that did feel like a flex, so I'm going to have to kind of power down a little bit.
But it is well-deserved, right? So you deserve
that.
each second of that flex, and we're going to shout out, and support you in your journey ahead with us as well. Now, you mentioned your story and, how you started this business, but why the name Keystroke? What does it mean?
Oh, my goodness. Okay, well, this is not something I expected to disclose because, we kind of referenced my vision in that. And probably one of the clearest examples of how I'm not a visionary. I started this company in 1994, which remember is before Windows 95. Okay. So I was a DOS and Windows for Workgroup guy. And I saw the whole GUI world coming and taking shape. And based on that vision that I have, this fabled vision, I said, okay, that's not going anywhere. I'm going to stick with the DOS keystrokes because that is here to stay, right? So I named my company Keystroke because I'd gotten very, very fast in DOS. So my hands were like just super fast. At doing keystrokes. So I thought, that was my vision of the future, which lasted, I don't know, 18 months before I realized how wrong I was. I'm married, so I don't have to wait that long anymore to realize how wrong I am. But it was something that I joke about a lot because it keeps me humble. But it was that was the genesis of it. It was a complete lack of vision on where the Windows GUI world was going.
Yeah.
And I ended up being a very short-term DOS holdout, and I gave up the battle very quickly.
No, it's funny, and it's amazing how things turn out the way that you didn't even imagine, and so much better than you expected initially, right?
Yeah, and it's funny because I'm extremely humble about whatever supposed visions I have, but I think it's more important to be able to recognize opportunities as they come up and try to take advantage of those. I always tell people, my development team, they're so used to it. Things will come up, we'll develop a roadmap for a particular product. And by the time that we are done, it looks nothing like the original roadmap. Okay. Yeah. And just because I don't pretend to be smart enough to envision all the different ways that it can evolve, but I do try to keep an open mind well enough to adapt when I see opportunities. And my development team has just kind of given up for any kind of commitment to the original plan because they know how organic it ends up being.
No, but I'm sure your team, everyone around your business, they must love the energy that you bring to the table, right? Because everything that you have told about or talked about in this podcast, it comes from a very natural place of, having the curiosity to solve a bigger problem. And that is a common point in every entrepreneur out there. Mm-hmm. And I'm also assuming orange is your favorite color, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Well,
pretty obvious.
Yes, and that I can take less credit for than you think. So the company remember the Canadian that came before me, whose company I bought, they actually were using orange, and they had something very similar, not identical, but similar to the logos that we move forward with. But we were a green company. Like we had hunter green, and I look back at that and I just kind of wince when I think of how oppressive and dark that green was. But the orange was something I took an immediate liking to and have played it up. And I really think from a branding perspective, anything that conveys that shock, it's almost a disruptive color and it doesn't blend with anything.
Exactly.
It does stand on its own very well.
I was about to mention that because I think when you're in SMB, the kind of colors you're choosing for branding and marketing, they also play a huge role, right? So great to touch on that. I'm loving this conversation and I don't want this to come to an end. That is the effect that Ken Quigley has on everyone around him. But we'll definitely have him back for another episode. Mm-hmm. Before we let you go right now, Ken, if there's one final piece of advice that you have for our listeners today, something that you'd want them to remember if they're feeling stuck or, hesitant about taking that first leap of faith, if you can whisper one thing into their ear, what would you say and why?
Well, I don't want to reach beyond my grasp because, when you sell hammers, everything looks like a nail. I know how to recommend what I sell and what has worked for me. And I had this question yesterday. I was talking to a prospect who reached out to us in response to some of our marketing. And I started talking to him about, lead generation, things like that. And he said, we are kind of stuck right now and we don't know how to get the ball moving. Yeah. And so I kind of laid out like a 5 or 6 step plan, and it may seem simple, but it is a mentality where you have to accept that you cannot just generate a marketing plan that's going to bring in a ton of leads, have a wide top of the funnel, and you're just going to sit there and you're going to quote and everything's going to go great. You've got to have a very humble notion that, your steps are going to be very methodical. You're going to produce a limited number of leads, but a consistent flow. Mm-hmm. And then you're going to have a narrow top of the funnel, but you're going to manage them with kind of like a high attention. So if I was sitting down with someone and they had like really no infrastructure, I would say, look, of course, I sell hammers, so I recommend that you buy these nails. Yeah. So I'd say you need a CRM, okay? But get a CRM with a support plan so you don't get stuck in your tracks trying to figure out what to do while you're trying to figure out how to pay the bills. So I said, get a support plan so someone can help you set it up. Then I would say, look at your accounting program and look at your Outlook. Those are 2 sources of data of past and present customers. So get that data and import it into your CRM, okay? Then most CRMs, and certainly ActAdvantage is one of them, will have built-in email list verification. Run a scan on your database, because certainly after 2020, we don't know how good old emails are. Like, there was a huge churn on emails. Right. So run that, because you don't want to start any kind of campaign where you're going to kill your sender reputation right off the bat.
Of course. Yeah.
Then I would say, okay, look at the tools that are built into your CRM, because the point of an e-marketing campaign is to drive traffic to your website.
Right.
Now, the reason that you imported in your customers and your Outlook contacts is because you don't have an immediate way of going out and grabbing people that you don't already know right away. Yeah. That may be very effective, but it's very expensive and very inefficient, okay, and very slow. And you need something to work right away. So you are going to drive your existing customers to your website. Then what you're going to do is you're going to enable your website with things like web forms, with chat services, with surveys, with calendar links where people can book appointments. Mm-hmm. And this website will be a place where everyone lands and will put in their information and feed directly in. Now, the reason that it's so important, people that often fill it, 95% of the websites out there, in fact, that might be low. When you fill out a web form, it ends up in someone's inbox, okay? Well, my theory, and I tell this to anyone, any kind of workflow that relies on human intervention will fail, okay? Guaranteed. Maybe not right away, but repeatedly.
Eventually, yeah.
Okay, you want something where someone fills out a web form, it goes into your database, it creates a follow-up, you log in the morning, it's like, call Kripa, okay? I'm going to call it, she's expressing interest in this, and boom, start doing that. So then what I would do is I would, send out those emails, drive them there, and then realize that, and then the emails that are in CRM, we often think of emails like an Outlook email.
Yeah. The
emails that you send out with CRM have built-in tracking. So you will know what people are interested in. They're going to click on this link. Your reporting is going to show me all the people that clicked on this link relating to XYZ. You're going to know everything, that all the people that are interested in XYZ versus ABC, and suddenly you're getting intel on all your prospects and your customers that you never otherwise had. Then you take all of that information, and I call that the digital stage. You take it all where you're harvesting all this information. People are updating their contacts or adding contacts to your database automatically, providing you all this feedback of what they're interested in. You take that information, you transition to analog, and you call them, okay? And then you call them. And you're going to face all kinds of resistance at first, but the worst thing that you can do is ignore that process and put faith in some kind of directionless campaign that may or may not yield anything. But if you start calling people based on how they've engaged, it's called response-driven nurture marketing. If you start calling people based, hey, I noticed you clicked on this. Is there something I can help you with? Right. It gives you license to call them. It gives you a relevant subject, a conversation to start with them on, and it will work. And I don't say that just because I sell it. We use it. We eat our own dog food. Everything that we do, that we sell, we do, and that's actually how we develop too. I often I joke that I'm a forgivable narcissist because I develop all these products that I need, hoping that the market will want them as well, and that's how we work on it. Anyway. So the community or the customers that you're talking to, you are eventually going to get traction, and you're going to feel the movement forward. You're going to feel, action, and suddenly that motion where you're transitioning to analog activity, you're going to feel your business moving forward. Have faith that it works, because it always does.
Wow, indeed, a great reminder that moving the cheese and adapting your mindset is often the key to the next breakthrough. Ken, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure being here. Appreciate your time.
All right, that was Ken Quigley from Keystroke.ca, a masterclass in CRM strategy, recurring income, and how to make your business goals actionable in 2026. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Canadian SME Small Business Podcast. Be sure to subscribe and visit CanadianSME.ca for more such resources. To learn more about how we are supporting the ecosystem, please visit the Canadian SME Small Business Foundation at smbfoundation.ca. And lastly, a very special thank you to our partners, UPS and ADP, our HR partner, for their ongoing commitment to empowering SMBs across Canada. I'll see you all in the next episode. Kripa Anand signing off.